February the 12th, 2022. And today, I guess the topic is what the unfolding Ukraine-Russia crisis. It's kind of moved to a new level of danger potentially. I mean, it looks as if French President Macron's attempt at diplomacy seems to have failed, in my opinion. So there's word out now, both from the White House and a news source I looked today, that perhaps Putin has already made the decision to invade Ukraine, and that that will occur sometime about midweek. I don't know if that's true or not. I think it's a little pessimistic, but I wouldn't rule it out, because essentially there is an issue of the appropriate temperature and the condition of the ground, and they really want heavily frozen ground for their armored vehicles to operate freely off-road. And so if that does happen, that's a possibility. I think it sounded a bit alarmist. It certainly spooked the markets yesterday toward the end of the day. On the other hand, this could be a deterrent effort on the part of the administration to say, hey, we know what you're up to, kind of calling out ahead of time. So that's an issue there. And I guess probably by the time of my next video, unless I do a special, we may actually know what the answer to that question is. I think my general viewpoint on this is that this represents a tremendous failure of U.S. policy if this actually happens. And I think it goes back to basically the beginning of the Trump administration, in which the Democrat Party continued to try to link Trump to Putin, and therefore forcing Trump to take more aggressive actions against Russia than he would normally have done, in order to look like he's not in league with Putin, which led to all sorts of sanctions and insults to Russia over a whole period of time. Then followed by electing a very weak president that really hardly knows what he's doing in the form of Biden. And I think that's kind of moved us into this position of presenting, the Russians with a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have even had. And so that's probably what's led to this situation. The thing that's also annoying me a little bit is the fact that I have not heard yet of any serious concessions we've been made in the negotiation, offering them anything that might dissuade them. All we've had is a lot of wild threats. And I'm not sure even how credible all those really are. But at any rate, if you like these videos, please give me a subscribe, give me a like. You can ring the bell for notifications, and comments are appreciated. Okay, so that kind of, but at any rate, that's the opening to, what I'm kind of doing here, discuss this situation. I know that President Biden is going to make a last-minute, phone call with Putin today, which I don't know how that's going to go. It may be too late if the decision's already been made. The problem is that, for one thing, Biden has sort of backed himself into a position now so that anything he does, any concession he makes, would make him look even weaker than ever. And it's kind of hard for a weak figure like this to back down. One can be reminiscent of Neville Chamberlain before World War II, when the decision to declare war on Germany, after the invasion of Poland. He sort of weakened his way into the position where that actually occurred, and then there's no way out. That's why these kind of weak presidents are very dangerous to world peace. On the other hand, I don't know. I still think that the one thing that clearly be offered is to say, okay, we'll guarantee that Ukraine doesn't go into NATO, and we'll work together on resolving a variety of other issues. Like, for instance, what I think a lot of people are really ignoring over here is the idea that there is a civil war of sorts going on inside of Ukraine, and has been for 8 years, between Russian separatists in the Donbass, as it's pronounced, region over near the Russian border. Obviously, this is supported by the Russian government, and if the Russians do fully invade, I suspect that they can expect that maybe NATO countries will end up, in the U.S. will support a similar efforts against them in the form of a guerrilla resistance. So that leads to an interesting question of what exactly does Russia have planned if they are going ahead with something? What is their exit plan at this point? I mean, if if a deal can't be reached that satisfies any of their demands, then they will lose face in a major way. And that's what's bothering me, is that we don't seem to realize that they have the balance of power in terms of force in the area, and that and if we try to force them to completely lose reputation in it, the war is on, and one that could have been avoided. Now, I think the other issue I think that to me is a little bit interesting is what sort of invasion does Russia have planned? Are they planning on like conquering Ukraine in its entirety, all the way up to the Polish border and the Romanian border? Is that the plan, to actually take the country and occupy it? Or is the plan to simply reinforce those areas that are already in rebellion and basically push the Ukrainian army back from those fronts that they're in? Because remember, with all the weapons that we've been providing to the Ukrainian military, if the Russians completely stand down, there's a very serious chance the Ukrainians will launch an offensive into those areas and wipe out those Russian resistance movements. And I don't think that Putin is willing to see that happen. So in a way, a lot of what we're doing is sort of triggering the conflict escalating. And the other thing is, because we provided sophisticated anti-tank weapons and the like, very limited maneuvers may no longer be viable for the Russians. The casualty levels might be too high. So the only way to deal with that is either do nothing or to actually launch a massive attack, Russian style. If anybody's familiar with World War II and the Eastern Front, when the Russians were on the offensive, let's say after Stalingrad, maybe they'll give you an idea of what that kind of attack is. It involves massive artillery and, of course, devastating airstrikes, because they have air dominance over there. They'll knock out the Ukrainian Air Force in the first day, and then they will just, those infantry with those, those Javelin missiles will be hit with a barrage of rockets with fragmentation and flechette warheads, that kind of thing, and massive artillery. And everything in the way gets obliterated before the armor even rolls. That's the kind of thing that Russia's likely to do if they really attack, given what we've given them. It's sort of like if you're carrying a gun and a concealed carry and you get into a conflict, the thing is probably going to escalate to a shooting incident. Of course, it prevents you from being beaten down, but it does mean you better be prepared to do what you need to be prepared to do if you get into that conflict, unless you get your own weapon taken away from you. So similarly speaking, since they've taken up effective anti-tank weapons, if they don't succeed, they're going to be obliterated by a massive attack, I think. And so that's the kind of thing we might be facing if the Russians decide to go in. Now, the question I still have is, if they actually go all the way to there's parts of Ukraine that are kind of really more Russian. And I don't know what their allegiance is, at least questionable, I think. There's other areas that are pretty hardcore anti-Russian. And if you go into those areas, particularly Kiev and those kind of urban areas, you're going to face guerrilla resistance. I mean, this is street fighting. This is not, just going into Czechoslovakia in 1968 or something. Even Hungary in 56 was a lot more resistance than this. I think that a lot less resistance, excuse me. This will be, I think, guerrilla warfare once the main battle has been decided. And occupying and maintaining that for them is going to be difficult. I think that's the biggest incentive the Russians have in not going in. And that's why I thought and do think that at the right moment, anyhow, effective concessions, which I think consist of basically, Ukraine not in NATO, agreeing to cede Crimea to the Russians formally and recognizing it, and then some kind of diplomatic solution about the areas that are in resistance, so that the internal conflict ends and a degree of local autonomy is there while the Ukrainian sovereignty otherwise remains intact. And then maybe some concessions on the Russian side on all this cyber warfare we've been facing. Of course, we don't know what we've been doing to them in cyber warfare either, because those ops are classified. So we have no idea. I mean, On the other hand, I'm not sure that they're as vulnerable to cyber as we are, because we use the internet for a lot of things. I'm using it right now for something, or will be when I post this. I mean, I use it when I do my bank transactions or a lot of other things. And I don't know if the Russians are quite as cyber dominant in their internal workings as we are. we use it, apparently was able to shut down a pipeline because it was somehow connected to the internet. See, so I think the problem in escalation is these killer sanctions that we're talking about putting on Russia. What is their counter move? I mean, they have to know what we can do economically. Are they just counting that our allies won't go along with it? Or do they have a response that we may not like very much either, which might cause economic chaos in our own country? See, these are all issues as well. And then, of course, I don't think we have forces deployed sufficient to do much more than show the flag. I mean, we have some light infantry, and I think a striker unit is coming in from Germany. I think we only have about 2 brigades there, and now we're bringing in a 3rd brigade of the 82nd Airborne. But I don't think this is designed to fight the Russians as such. It's designed to, basically reinforce our NATO front countries of Poland and Romania. So, and there are other NATO troops that could be deployed with heavy armor that haven't been deployed yet. So there's no intention of actually fighting. There's people talking about us fighting the Russians, actually, like ground combat. I don't think that's in the cards at all. And I also think that the guerrilla resistance, if they really take the whole country that Russia will encounter, is probably sufficient that I would suggest that they'll have a hard time digesting what they just ate if they do it. And that's the downside of them doing this, as well as the economic impacts. Of course, if Germany can't afford the economic war that we want to wage and they break with us, that might be a major schism in the whole NATO alliance, which would be a strategic victory for the Russians. Okay, so these are things to take into account as this goes forward. And I don't know, maybe we're overhyped on this right now. On the other hand, the U.S. intelligence community is quite sophisticated. In addition to, I'm sure we have human assets in Russia, and we have a lot of signal intelligence, and of course, satellite intelligence, video, photos of troop movements and all that. And if you're actually going to invade, there's a point where you take certain actions you probably wouldn't take ahead of time. That would be like issuing live ammo to all your infantry troops, grenades, and that sort of thing. And when you get to that point, I mean, I doubt the Russians generally have their infantry in a peacetime training mode running around with live ammo for the most part, or very much of it. So if there's a full combat gear has been issued, then you start worrying a bit more that this is going to go hot real quick, I think. And so that's one thing that I'm sure that those kind of orders are not going to be, our signal intelligence would pick that up, I'm sure. And so, they may know what they're talking about, that maybe Putin's already made his call. And, I think, so we'll just have to see what occurs here. Like I said, I still thought early on that with a little bit of, negotiation, a few reasonable concessions, we could actually avoid this whole thing. I understand the other argument that one concession leads to another, and I fully agree that that's an issue. But I think in this case, the one thing, since we don't really want Ukraine and NATO anyhow, and since we don't have the physical ability to protect it, it looks to me like that's a reasonable concession. The protection is just the international economic and diplomatic fallout of doing it, not particularly our ability to defend it. So there's really no gain in them being in NATO, in my opinion. I mean, really, for Ukraine. And in Ukraine, it seems to have been incredibly arrogant, in my opinion, not to have tried to negotiate a deal with the Russians to avert this whole thing. I mean, it's possible that the Russian demands are simply so onerous that they couldn't be met. And I'm open to that. But at the same time, I tend to think probably not, because I can't believe the Russians really want to engage in the kind of conflict that we're looking at. Now, on the other hand, what I think could be the case is that they might simply, like I say, move into the Russian ethnic areas that are already in resistance and then push back somewhat further. Probably given the Western sanctions, they need to go somewhat further in order to have what we'd say hostages, if you will, to negotiate a settlement later. And that they don't intend to keep everything. They just intend to, take a certain amount and then take some extra to basically knock out most of the Ukrainian regular army and then try to go into defensive posture and try to get a ceasefire and then try to negotiate something from a position of strength rather than the current position where they're kind of being ignored. And that's probably the most optimistic thing if it actually goes active. But on the other hand, if If that isn't the case, they try to occupy the whole country, then we're really in. I think they're in for some real trouble too, actually, because I suspect that the guerrilla resistance will go on for quite a while, and this sort of street fighting is very destructive. You'll be talking probably a wave of refugees flowing into Poland and Romania and Europe. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we really, that they really shouldn't want this to go down this way. So, at any rate, that's kind of what I think about it for now. And we'll just have to see in the days ahead whether this is alarmist, what we're hearing from the administration and news sources, or whether it really is about to happen. But apparently the weather conditions are approaching the level where it's optimum for doing this sort of thing. So, at any rate, there's a lot of else things going on, but I thought this was kind of the topic of the day. There is another issue out I'll briefly address, very brief, is that there is a real mystery going on about the bomber that planned the two bombs on January the 5th before the big event at the Capitol. And the fact that to this date the FBI has not announced an arrest of this individual seems to be a real mystery. It's been discussed in various quarters on the right. And I may address that in a future video as we get a little bit more information. I have a few thoughts about it. And I guess this will be it for now, and we'll, wrap this up, and until next time.